Okay, Chair, we're now live on YouTube. If you'd like to start the meeting, thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Good afternoon and welcome to East Devon District Council's virtual Personnel Committee meeting on the 19th of May 2022. I'm your chair, Councillor Ian Thomas, and I'd also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting on the Council's YouTube channel, either live or through a recording. Based on a decision of Council, we'll continue to hold virtual meetings until the 31st of October 2022. I'd like to remind both members and public attending or watching that this Council has delegated much of its decision-making power to our senior officers. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. Will members please turn off any telephone devices or switch them to silent? In the event of a break in the internet connection, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. If, after 15 minutes, we're not able to reconnect, we'll consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. We'll now start the meeting with the roll call of committee members present, please. Debbie, over to you.
Thank you. We'll start with you, Chair, please. Councillor Thomas.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ranger, I don't see on the call. Councillor Allen, I don't see. Councillor Armstrong next, please. Are you with us, Megan? I can see her, but not here. We'll come back to you. Councillor Arnott, I don't see on the call yet. Councillor Bickley sent her apologies. Councillor Blakey, then, please.
Present.
Thank you.
That is it.
Councillor Cahill is not in the call. Councillor Brewster Sarum next, please.
Present. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. I've had apologies from Councillor Ian Hall. So on to Councillor Hayward, please.
Present. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. I've had apologies from Councillor Lawrence, so we'll move on to Councillor Loudon, please.
I'm here, Debbie, thank you. And I think Councillor Ranger, probably I ought to give her apologies.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hookway, please.
Present, thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. And Councillor Pepper, I don't see on the call. So, Chair, I can confirm that you're quorate today. Thank you.
Debbie, I'm sorry, and Chair, I'm sorry about that. I just had to answer the call. It's Megan.
Lovely.
So I think I missed my name, so I am present. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan.
Well, we'll take it that Megan's definitely present. And sorry, I should have said earlier on that Councillor Ranger had sent her apologies through me earlier, and I forgot to mention that. Agenda item 1, public speaking. There are no members of the public registered to speak. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 22nd of March it says 2002 here, but I'm sure that actually means 2022. If anybody's got a concern with the minutes, could you please raise your electronic hand? Otherwise, I'll assume you're content to accept the minutes as presented. Seeing no hands, so then the minutes are accepted. Thank you very much, Debbie. Apologies, we've been through those. I imagine are there any late apologies?
No, Chair. So just as a reminder, we've got apologies from Councillors Ranger, Bickley, Hall and Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. And if any members have any declaration of interest they'd like to make, please raise their hands either now or if it becomes apparent during the discussions, raise your hand at the time and we'll note those down. I'm not seeing any declarations of interest. Item 5 is our matters of urgency. I have no matters of urgency identified for today. Item 6 are confidential and exempt items. There is one confidential exempt items, which are, item in that respect, which officers recommend should be dealt with in this way, and that's listed on agenda item 10. Straight on to agenda item 7. This is the Work Smart review. And could I pass over to Jo Fellers, please, our HR manager. Jo.
Hello, thank you, Ian, and hello, everybody. The Work Smart report is an update on our flexible working arrangements, which we've been reviewing, as you know, informed by learning through the pandemic. I've previously shared with you the Work Smart vision, outcomes and principles, and these are now reflected in the Work Smart policy, which you'll see in the report I'm asking a committee to recommend, along with minor amendments to the flexible working request policy and our travel policies, to ensure they're all aligned. The principles, which are paragraph 5 of the Work Smart policy at the appendix 1, are the non-negotiables within which we expect teams to determine their working arrangements going forward. And those team discussions are now happening. They started at the beginning of June. We prepared a toolkit for managers, which they can work through with their teams. And we've asked teams to have those discussions during May and June. And the idea is that they'll look at each of the principles and determine what that means for them and how that will work in practice in their team, with the idea of hopefully coming to a consensus about team working arrangements going forward, which will also be within a sort of written team agreement that people will be able to refer to. Following the team conversations during May and June, we're then asking managers also to submit a survey on behalf of their team, which will provide us with sort of key information around things like workspace training and technology requirements, but other things as well. And that will help myself and the other members of the Work Smart Review working group to determine our next steps with regard to Work Smart and how we can support this sort of new approach to working arrangements across the council. We're also including frontline teams in that, so they're having similar discussions, also obviously taking into account the sort of particular needs of their roles and the nature of their roles, but we are very keen that we include all teams across the council in these discussions so we can understand everybody's sort of needs around training, workspaces, technology and so on. You'll see in the report as well that as part of the team discussions, we're trying out a new carbon calculator that's been developed by the University of Exeter. And we're going to use that to collect commuting data, mileage data from staff, both before, what their sort of arrangements were pre the pandemic in terms of commuting, and what they think there will be sort of post-pandemic as part of their new team Work Smart arrangements. And that's quite exciting for us because that will give us some, some initial good data around the carbon impacts of travel and, and the impacts of working in a more flexible approach and how that can support our climate change strategy. The climate change officer is part of the Work Smart Review working group, and obviously she'll be involved in analysing the results of the survey and so on, and then using that to inform her next steps as well. As stated at paragraph 3.3 in the report, and also reflected in the Work Smart policy, we won't be allowing 100% home working arrangements, except in very exceptional circumstances. And that's because we don't believe that that is aligned with the Work Smart principles. There will be a need for individuals to attend our workspaces for various reasons, obviously service delivery being, paramount, but also to support team cohesion and things like supporting new starters within the team, apprentices, that sort of thing. So that's why we've made that decision that 100% home working arrangements won't be agreed. And that's also reflected, as you'll see, in the revisions to the flexible working request policy. If helpful, obviously I'll take questions now if anybody's got questions or points, but if helpful, I can also provide a further update on how Work Smart's going, the team discussions and so on, and also the survey results at what I'd suggest our autumn committee meeting rather than our July committee meeting, because the survey managers won't be submitting the survey, the closing date for that is the end of June, so we won't have the data by the 5th of July meeting, but certainly by the autumn we'll be in a position to report back to you on what the survey results are showing, how Work Smart is going within the first few months of operation. And then we'll be doing further evaluation as Work Smart's embedded, including we will be doing a sort of formal first year evaluation next summer, which the detail to be confirmed, but I'm anticipating things like staff surveys and so on to look at how it's working and whether it's meeting our needs as an organisation. And so that's a helpful sort of summary of the report. And you've got any questions or points that you want me to?
Thanks.
Happy to.
Thank you very much for that, Joe. I'm not actually getting any yellow hands at the moment. Oh, there we go. As if by magic, our Vice Chair for the afternoon, Councillor Loudon. John.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to wait to see if anybody else wanted to come in, but right, a few points arising out of this, and thanks, Joe. It seems to me this is it's been sensible and appropriate that we take this opportunity post lockdown and post hopefully the main difficulties around COVID, that we review our staff's working arrangements. It just seems sensible to look back, doesn't it, over what the last few years in particular have shown us in terms of positives and negatives of the changes, fairly rushed changes in some circumstances to people's working arrangement. I suspect it's got to be good news for our future recruitment and retention if we can offer what is good homework balance for staff, but at the same time making sure our number one priority is service delivery, as Joe has outlined. So I think this is good news for the employer and good news for the staff. Equally, as Joe has outlined, it will also help us as council meet some of our climate change objectives, because we won't be having to have staff travelling to and from work as much as possible, etc. So I think this is a welcome report. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much, John. Councillor Desarum. Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered what would you consider to be or envisage to be exceptional circumstances, as you touch on it in 14.2, where it says request will be refused unless there are sort of exceptional circumstances. So I wonder, Joe, whether you kind of like could outline to us anything which you might consider would be exceptional. That would be most helpful. Thank you.
Joe?
That's a tricky one, because I don't want to preempt any requests that come through. I mean, I guess for me, it would, this will be tested out as and when we get any flexible working requests with regard to, wanting to work 100% from home. But I think it will be, I'm thinking sort of linked to, disability and reasonable adjustments, whether that would be as an employer, a reasonable adjustment that we could make. From an equality perspective, but it's that key word is reasonable. So again, that would only be if it was meeting our service needs, and we could support it in that way. So yeah, it's a tricky one for me to answer, but we just want to set that out at the outset, really, that clarity for staff that this is the way that we want to go. So, that we've got that, it's so important for team cohesion and so on that we have that flexibility.
Thank you, Joe. That's most helpful.
Thanks for that, Joe. It looks like the Chief Executive is about to make an exceptional request. Mark?
No, I think it's just to sort of build on what Joe said, really, Bruce. I think for me, it will be a combination of, compelling personal circumstances, but then also perhaps maybe an area of specialization where our need is acute, and it might be more perhaps for a time limited period rather than a permanent period. So the state of the recruitment market situation, I think there'll be a range of factors that will come into play, but that just emphasises the fact that it will be in exceptional cases, I think.
And I guess sort of flowing from that as well, it's worth noting that if we do look at 100% home working arrangements, that's a contractual change, and there are implications of that as well. And I think more arguments, I guess, from staff that around paying things like home working allowance and things, which obviously with the approach we're taking, we're not going down that road. And talking to other local authorities across the Southwest on Monday, so with my counterparts on Monday, most other authorities are in a similar, doing the same sort of thing. So that's part of the thinking as well. It just, you know, we don't want to get into lots of contractual changes if we can help it.
Thank you very much. Joe, do we have any more questions on that first section? No, it's all very, very quiet. On that basis, then I'll move the recommendation on page 7 from the chair that the committee recommends new work smart policy and minor amendments to the flexible working requests and travel policies to senior officers for decision. Could all those in favour please indicate with the green ticks, all those against with the red crosses, please.
So, Chair, I have 7 votes in support, no votes against and no abstentions. That's carried. Thank you.
Lovely. On that basis, then I confirm that that recommendation goes forward to senior officers for decisions. Next one is agenda item 8, which is back to Joe again, just for a change. It's the people data report. Joe, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. So this is the second of the regular people data reports that I agreed I'd bring to committee. And these sort of focus on key data for us as an organisation, things like headcount, vacancies, turnover and sickness. You'll see that the data is up to the 31st of March in terms of what we're reporting today. So there's a bit of a lag behind, but you know, hopefully that is helpful. In paragraph 2 of the report, I've just summarised some of the key highlights of the data, and obviously you can look at the detail in the appendix. I think of particular note, as you'll see, is the increase in vacancies since the last reported data, which was at the end of December last year. It's, as I've said in the report, I mean, you know, it's gone from sort of 23 at 31st of December to 47 at the 31st of March. And as I said in the report, it's quite difficult because we haven't done that vacancy reporting, we haven't pulled out that data before. It's difficult to say whether there was a blip, you know, at December, you know, linked to Christmas and so on around the number of vacancies, or whether we are seeing an increase. Obviously, anecdotally, we know from across the organisation that we're all still experiencing recruitment and retention issues across, you know, all roles, and we're no different from other organisations. So I think 47 is probably more, you know, a reflection of where we are as an organisation than maybe the 23 was at Christmas. But just mention that as a note of caution. And the other thing I just wanted to flag was around market supplements. So they obviously, as you can see, remain high and are across all areas of the council, again linked to the recruitment retention issues we're experiencing. And we continue to have additional requests coming through. And as we've said before, and no doubt we'll talk about it in a moment, this is one issue that we aim to resolve through the reward review. So I'll obviously take questions on the report if that's helpful. I just wanted to also flag that, as agreed with committee in November, our next report, which will be for the July meeting, will be the overall sort of annual people data report. So that will pick up on some of the things that are in these sort of regular reports, but also there'll be other information, for example, around equality and diversity. So, you know, just to make you aware that will be the plan for the next meeting. But obviously things like vacancies and turnover data will form part of that information as well. So we can keep an eye on that.
Thank you very much, Joe. Any questions, comments, colleagues? It's all very quiet here. I'll have Mr. Ledger, Councillor Ledger, Dan.
Thanks very much, Chair. Joe, this is more of a broad overview of the council as a whole. Do we have further details on service specifics for each of these headings, just to see if there's any problem areas within services themselves, or if it is all across the council?
Yeah, we have got data at service level, but to be honest, it is across the council. You know, from every type of role that we're going out to recruitment. Even, I mean, I think I've mentioned here at committee before around we've got business admin apprenticeships and revenue and benefits. We can't even fill those. So, you know, we're having trouble across the whole range of occupational areas and levels at the moment. And again, talking to my peers across other councils on Monday, everybody else is in the same boat. But we're all struggling. So certainly, I've got that service data available. yeah, it's across the board, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Joe. Mark, is this a comment relevant to this particular question?
Yes. So
Okay.
if you look at page 27 of the agenda papers, you get a broad picture in terms of vacancy data by service lead, which gives you a suggestion of the numbers in numerical terms, perhaps not percentage terms. But I'd endorse what Joe said, but then also there are little pockets where it's acute. So, for example, had a meeting yesterday with Charlie Plowden in the countryside team. I think he's got a tree team of either 4 or 5 officers. He's down to 1 and can't recruit, for example. So, there's a general picture, but then there are some acute areas, and I think from Dan's sort of interest, housing have reported in some of their areas that they are struggling, particularly with local salaries on offer elsewhere within the sort of the extra travel to work area.
Thank you, Mark. I would imagine with inflation running as it is, that's not going to get any easier. Councillor Desar and Bruce.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, Joe, just to quickly touch on the agency numbers. I noticed that agency numbers have remained steady at 22 this month and 22 in the last reporting period. Do you envisage, I know you discussed the problems across the board, do you envisage the agency numbers rising or remaining at that sort of level as we go forward into the next quarter?
Yeah. It's difficult to tell, because even with agency, we're struggling to get people to come in and do that work because of the demand across the whole range of organisations. So and also we don't hold the detail of that agency data. All we've got is the overarching figure for the organisation, because that's held locally by service areas. So it's really difficult to tell. I think the demand might be there, but whether we can fill that demand through agency, if we can't fill through other routes, remains to be seen, to be honest. I don't know, Mark, whether there's anything from your point of view around agency, talking to service leads and so on, but it's...
Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think it's twofold. I think we should anticipate probably a short-term increase if we can find staff, agency staff. But to give you an example, we will have, as of next week, a vacant service lead post. I interviewed for that last week or week before last, along with the relevant strategic lead and someone from HR. We were unable to appoint, and even at the time, the consultants were suggesting that we were really going to struggle to get a good shortlist with the salary that was on offer. And we did get a shortlist, but the quality wasn't there. So part of the consideration is, do we try and look for an interim to help out pro tem? But then the advice we're getting is that you're going to struggle to get an interim because that they can demand what they want almost, which is a difficulty at the moment, really.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Loudon, John.
I suspect that the points that Mark's just been talking about will crop up again under the next agenda item, I would guess, because it's all interrelated, isn't it? It doesn't surprise me Dan asked the question he did, because it's a legitimate and appropriate question for him to ask as he's looking over his area of responsibility. I think this is a useful overview that we get from Joe with the data. It's not meant to be detailed. And certainly not to give meant to give us detail, in specific areas per se. It's to give us a flavour, isn't it, of what is going on across the organisation. So I welcome that. But just looking at the data in the appendix, if we look at the voluntary turnover, and apologies because I've printed my copy out, and don't tell anybody I've done that. On the third page, I've got voluntary turnover, and I'm just wondering at some point, and I know it's not easy for you and your colleagues to do, Joe, but I'm just wondering, linked to our whole issue of looking at recruitment and retention, whether we could get a sort of the top 3 reasons perhaps for people leaving. That might assist us on our side of the table in understanding what's going on. Because if people say, oh, I'm retired, most people are retiring, most people are going to a better promotion and things like that, then that's the normal churn, as opposed to other problems. If I then turn to the sickness absence stats, that seems to suggest to me that we're relatively steady, both year on year and quarter on quarter. I mean, there's slight variations, but it's at the margins, isn't it? And whilst any employer always wants to get its sickness absence rates down, that in itself doesn't suggest to me that we've got an underlying problem. And often when you've got an underlying problem, then that's symptomatic of something more unhealthy, quote unquote, in the organisation. And if you look at then the reasons for absence, for sickness absence, you've broken it down there to short-term, medium-term and long-term. And it doesn't take too many long-term employees are off on long-term sickness, does it, to skew the data at all? And then just finally, I'm just wondering, do you have a feel on the COVID data at the very end there, which seems, we seem to escape relatively well, unless perhaps there's been some underreporting, possibly, I don't know, especially if people were working at home. It may be that perhaps wasn't a priority for them to do. But if I look at that, so is there any particular part of the organisation or parts of the organisation that appear to have been affected most by the sickness absence from COVID? Or is it just a general?
Yeah, I'd need to check whether there are particular service areas that, because these figures are for those who had a positive COVID test and were off sick, so they were, they weren't able to work from home. So I'd need to look at the data behind that in terms of whether there were any particular services that we were, particularly affected. I mean, I think you're right, John. Overall, we have come off, fairly lightly, I think, in terms of COVID absence, and I think that's, a big part of the COVID safe measures that we've had in place, both within offices but also across our other establishments as well. So, which we're continuing with, in terms of mask wearing in offices and so on. So I think that's been really positive for us, and hopefully coming out of that now. But I think you're right. Overall, I feel, our sickness absence rates are stable. I think we've got really good, robust absence management procedures in place that that managers are working through with hands-on support from my HR team. So I'm less worried about that side of things than I am obviously around vacancies and just our ability to be able to recruit to those vacancies.
Thank you for that, Joe. Councillor Young, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. From my perspective in my portfolio, almost every conversation I have with staff at the moment is that they're snowed under with work. They've got colleagues that are on long COVID. They've got colleagues that are leaving, which is it's a ever decreasing sort of circle of consequence that the more stress we put on the more they want to leave, then they leave even more stress. Now we've got a service lead that we can't fill because of we're not offering enough. We've got environmental health officers. 3 offices down to 1. What happens if he gets COVID or has a day off or training? I've got engineer that to recruit. I've got pretty well all my officers are saying, no, I'm just snowed under. You'll have to wait for this report. I have to wait for that, and it's getting critical. I'm scared to phone these people up sometime now, because I don't want to be pushing them. So it's getting pretty dire.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. Mark, would you like to comment on that as a logical response? I mean, is that across the board? Is that something that we're
only thanks
dealing
for
with?
cheering us up, Jeff.
I haven't gone on to football yet.
Yeah, well, there we go. No, I mean, well, this is the art of management, isn't it, really? We have discussed at SMT plus level whether we're getting into, sort of invoking some of our contingency plans, but we're not there yet, I don't think. But, the situation is acute, but I think, there is still a significant amount of goodwill from the staff. And I think that's where you see it as a whole package of issues, isn't it? We are still perceived, in the main to be a good employer. They recognise that. I think, the work smart policy, which you've just, okay to sign off, there's no doubt from the conversations I've had over the last few weeks that ongoing flexibility is a good draw. I think they talk amongst themselves about what other councils are doing who appear to be adopting a more dogmatic or hardline approach to those things, and they're thinking, well, actually, I'm willing to stick with East Devon for a bit longer, because I also know that, as we'll see later on in this agenda, East Devon is also looking at the other side of the equation in terms of the reward review. So it's a question of regular assessment and monitoring, really. I think that the main problem is where we do get to a potential area of service failure, where, for example, we are down to 1 member of a team, and I have said to the service lead, you've got to tell the members the position, because there is no point members saying, well, we need to do this, we need to do that, when basically it's impossible to achieve. So there is a bit of an obligation on the part of the service leads to inform their portfolio holders, inform the members that for a certain period of time we are down to 1 member of staff. So things are going to have to wait, because our priority will be, for example, responding to planning applications, not doing some of the more proactive work we might like to do, for example. So I think it's a question of sort of regular engagement and monitoring on that basis, really, Ian.
Thank you very much. On that happy note, I mean, I've got to be honest, personally, I think everything in the football garden's pretty rosy at the moment. But moving on from that, in the absence of anybody else indicating to speak, I'll move the recommendation from the chair that the committee endorses the contents of this report. Could you please indicate in the normal way, please?
And that's carried, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Joe, as well. Next, on to agenda item 9, which is the personnel forward plan, which is on an unidentified page number. Agenda item 9, the last of the last page on the section A notes. Joe, would you like to comment on that, please?
Chair, we should be going to part B.
What, on personnel forward plan?
Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry, I do apologise for that.
I know you're enjoying being vice chair, John, but don't peak too early, Joe, personnel forward plan.
Yeah. So forward plan, as much an aid memoir for me as for all of you, really. But self-explanatory. As I've mentioned earlier, for July, I'll bring the annual people data report. So that's sort of more detail for the whole of the last financial year. And I haven't popped it on there actually, but for October, as I mentioned, under the Work Smart update, I think it'd be helpful at that point, as well as the items we've got on there, that I do a Work Smart update and give you some sort of key findings from the survey and so on as well. So I'll make sure that's added in. But I guess, is there anything else that you would want me to bring to future meetings that sort of springs to mind that isn't on that list?
Members, any comments, please, on that? I think everybody must be getting warmed up, ready for tonight, Joe. I didn't, for the headline show. Anyway, so thank you very much for that. If we can vote, the requirement here is to note that forward plan. Perhaps again, if we could vote on that in the normal way.
And that's carried, Chair. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that. So the report is noted. Chair's closing remarks. That brings the public section of our meeting to an end for today. I'd like to thank everyone involved, including any members of the public watching online on the Council YouTube channel, for taking part. Could I please remind members remaining for the next private section of the meeting that the supporting officer will confirm when the meeting is no longer being streamed before we continue. So perhaps we could be careful what's said in the interim. Thank you very much. Debbie, over to you.